Pastor David Hansen, as most of you know, is the author of a number of books. One particularly that we have used in our pastoral ministry class is The Art of Pastoring. And it is a classic book on pastoral ministry, very thoughtful, theological, and provides some excellent handles for us and gives us some good frameworks with which to engage ministry. So he wrote that while he was in Montana as pastor. Did a lot of fly fishing in the meantime, and also was able to bring together the theological considerations for pastoral ministry as they applied to the experiences of an everyday schedule of pastoral ministry. So it's good stuff. And then from there he went to Cincinnati and served at Kenwood Baptist Church. And then from Kenwood Baptist Church he moved from the suburbs into the city. You notice the move there from Montana, the rural experience of Montana, to the suburbs, right into the city. And he's working with Heritage Community Church, and it's about 100-year-old church that has quite a number of different groups represented in the church, ethnic groups and such, and people of different class. So it's a great ministry for him. That here again he's applying the truths of what he's learned in pastoral ministry to all different kinds of ministry. So you can see that the framework that he establishes in The Art of Pastoring applies to rural ministry, to suburban ministry, to city ministry. So it's good stuff. So we're glad that you're here to be able to hear him and also to engage in conversation with him on these different matters. And there's plenty of pizza back there, so you can enjoy pizza. And you can enjoy the pizza. So, and also the conversation. So why don't you come up and have a seat at least, David, so you put your plate down, and we can all watch him eat as he watches you eat. And I don't know how you want to frame this, Dave, but you could share some of the things you learned, or just take questions and engage with however you want to do it. So, okay. Okay. Tell us from your ministry, give us some of the three significant. Talk about two mistakes you've made in ministry, and what did you learn from those? And then they'll have some questions. How's that sound? Okay?
Well, okay. I was informed that I would have the opportunity to tell you mistakes I'd made and then what I'd learned from them. It took me a long time to think of mistakes that I hadn't repeated over and over and over, and that I really hadn't learned anything from in terms of making corrections. But that's not in any way cynical. It's a way of understanding your limitations, because the pastoral ministry is however, whatever your setting, it's a big thing, isn't it? And no one can do it all. So I guess from my continual mistakes, I've learned that I just can't do it all, and what I can do by God's grace is enough. And He so often covers my butt on things that I can't do well. It's New England, but you can say that. I did think of one. I did think of several, though, that were really key to me. And that is, when I got out of seminary and I was preaching every Sunday, I was very zealous at Gordon-Conwell for the text and studying in the languages. And I still am. But when I started, I felt like I needed to discuss textual variants from the pulpit. and I felt like I needed to address passages that might be seem contradictory, and I tried not to pretend that I could solve all of them, but I was doing that, and I think, you know, it wasn't really truly so much that I wanted to display my knowledge. Now, that is part of my life, but I was so zealous, and still am, for the text, and I didn't know what part of the text was really relevant or what really needed to be said this Sunday. So our moderator, I don't think he thought this up on his own. He came to me, and I was probably 35 at the time, 34, and he was the same age. He came to me and he said, "Now, Dave," he said, "you don't need to tell us everything you know about the text." He put this so nicely. He said, "We trust you to decide what we need to hear from the text every Sunday." Wasn't that wonderful? It didn't take long for that one to come to mind. And, you know, he just set me free, because and that set me to studying the text and realizing that there are thousands of sermons in every verse of the Bible, because there are thousands of ways you can put it. It applies in thousands and thousands of languages, and every language is going to have different thought forms, different metaphors, and you can strive to have an authentic understanding of the text, and you can still. So preach it, but in many ways. So I started thinking, after I thought, okay, what do they really need to hear this Sunday from this text? And that became a real guiding force in my life, and I've never stopped doing that. So, so I mull over the text, I study it, and then there's this crucial moment where I pray, okay, Lord, what do I need to say this Sunday? Sometimes I pray, actually went many years and still do it, following the lead of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who says that every sermon fights a battle. Every sermon is a battle with Satan, with demons. Satan waits nowhere for battle as worship on Sunday morning. He said, we do not defeat Satan. The Word of God and Jesus Christ defeats Satan. And the more I read about Dietrich Bonhoeffer and preaching, he sees this as this great big apocalyptic event. It's like the book of Revelation or something, just in a little church where you open the Word. So I started praying, you know, how will the devil be defeated by the Word of God? What do we need to hear? And then waiting and thinking and just working on, you know, let's just go for it. If I come 2/3 the way through the sermon and I realize this thing is a total bomb, I think, okay, keep preaching. One person here needs to hear this. You know, you worked on this, you prayed through this. That doesn't mean it's that good, but someone needs to hear it. So feel free to study the text, mull over it, and then just take the responsibility, the joyous responsibility of deciding, what do I need to say out of this text? And if it revolves around a textual variant, just go for it. They can take that. You know, I really found that I've served churches where there were people with educations that took a long time in institutions, and I've pastored people who were educated in all kinds of things and had very little to do with anything even finishing high school. And I have found that you can preach church history examples, you can talk about anything up there, and the education level, in terms of institutional education, makes no difference at all in what they can get. In fact, if anything, people in today's world who are highly educated have shorter attention spans for these things than people who are just country folks and they're just listening. So, anyway. Okay, there we go. Do you have a question now?
Yeah, I got a question.
Okay. Oh, gosh.
When was the last time you went fly fishing?
Well, the last time I went, one of the great things about ministry is you have friends in different places, and some friends of mine in Belgrade, near Bozeman, I'd fished with them, and they are big hunters, which I've never really succeeded at. And they have horses and mules and all these things, and every year they go on a long horse-mule backpack trip into the Bob Marshall Wilderness, which is about 100 miles south of Glacier. And this is a 1,000,000-acre wilderness. So last time I went, 2 years ago, I went with them on this trip for the first time. That was just wonderful, but I was really addicted to fly fishing, so then I became addicted to something that I absolutely couldn't succeed at, which is golf. I've never succeeded at a land sport, so anyway, that's it.
I read The Art of Passion a couple of years ago, really appreciated it. And so I wanted to read just a short little bit here out of the book and ask you a question on this. On page 27, there's a subheading.
I can't stand listening to my own book. That's why I'm rolling my eyes. Okay. Okay.
It says this: in order to be parables, so at the beginning of the book, what you said is, look, you're not Jesus, I'm not Jesus. As a pastor, it's not your job to be Jesus.
Yeah.
For other people, but your ministry is a ministry of presence where you're
Mm-hmm.
and actually there's a parable. So what you say, in order to be parables of Jesus, we must pay close attention to two areas of his life: his ministry and the narrative of his life. Jesus' ministry is so simple that most pastors consider it naive. Word, prayer, friendship, sacrament, leadership, that's all. Jesus' life has a general narrative direction. We call this general direction the way of the cross. Jesus understood from the beginning that his was a life of sacrifice. His life flowed toward the cross at all times. He never climbed any first-century ladders of success. I like that little phrase. The devil showed him plenty. The people begged him to climb them. Jesus rejected ladders and consistently chose the downward road of sacrifice. Do you still affirm that? I mean, do you still see that, or has your view of pastoral ministry kind of changed?
Well, I think that I have not changed that. Different settings and different times of life, we have to go on the downward thing in different ways. So I'm learning that. To me, really one of the foundational texts of the Incarnation is one of the foundational texts of our lives, which is Philippians chapter 2. And I just take that kenosis passage where Jesus says, have the mind of Christ, who, though being God, emptied himself, became human, became a servant, obedient to death, obedient to the cross and death, and then he's resurrected. Well, what I think is, and I've been drawn into this, and that is I think we want to jump from about the middle of this over to the resurrection and just go up like that. And I think a lot of our drive and our strategies are designed to jump over to the resurrection too soon. So, wanting to get on that resurrection thing now is something that I deal with, and every new situation in life gives me opportunities to get back on the Philippians 2 thing.
So if the narrative direction is the way of the cross, how do you measure success as a pastor? What kind of metric do you use, or is it the wrong thing to even say, measuring success in the pastor?
Well, I like it when my churches grow. I think financial viability is a big deal. A lot of times I find out that I really changed people's lives and I didn't know it at the time. And I struggle with metrics always, but I don't know. I don't have metrics. I have a lot of arrogance about wanting it to get big. But that's been a good thing too. I mean, it's good to struggle with that. Yeah, does that come close? Okay, thank you. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, at that point, I don't know that, yeah, whenever they came with a church growth book of any kind, that in Montana, it meant they had about 18 months and then be gone. Yeah. Well, I do think that I think the church growth movement, whatever it is and whoever it helps, and it does provide some help for people. I think the church growth ministry presents itself as something that works, but they don't keep track of their failures. And so it sort of looks like research, but in grant writing, you have to keep track of your failures. And there's none of that. And so there are a lot of pastors out there of different sizes of churches who feel like they have failed because they've tried everything and it hasn't worked. So it's not for me to say if it works or doesn't work, but I just know a lot of pastors that feel like they've failed because they did what the experts said and they sold it to the people. And I'm all in favor of common sense. I'm all in favor of grabbing ideas. But there's a technological reliance there. We live in a technological society, far more about technology than science. And and that's just part of our milieu. A lot of them are just blatant propaganda techniques. One of my favorite thinkers is Jacques Ellul. He was a French sociologist, law professor, did all kinds of things. He wrote a book in 1962. Well, it was published in English in 1962 called Propaganda. And in this book, he analyzed and summarized the propaganda techniques of World War II and the Cold War. And he did it for both sides. There was he was a fighter in the French underground. But he didn't, just as a scientist, as a scholar, he said, what did they do, what did they do? And he found out that they used largely the same methods all the way from World War II to the Cold War. And I read that book in about 1972, I guess. I skimmed it, and then I read it later on when I was first solo pastor in Montana. And it reads like a church growth book. You know Mao Zedong, or however you pronounce that, they started small groups. And the way they describe small groups sounds exactly what small groups are today. Now, just because he did it, I don't know what it means. But I will tell you this, that when small groups are used as a form of self-aggrandizement, when they're used to make the church bigger without a profound concern for meeting people's needs, then it's just propaganda. Yeah. And we're trying to start them in our church, but I can't organize things, so maybe it'll fail, maybe not. But because I've been in small groups that were really powerful. I'm not against it. But when you read it, and even back then, and the thing is about this book, it was translated into English, I think it was 1963. It is still in print. it is still sell, and it is still used in universities to this day. I did a D-Min class with a guy. He was a young pastor, and he studied at University of California at Berkeley, and he'd used the book there. This is a classic text. Read it, and you can learn how to grow your church. He also said this, and this is so fascinating. He said, educated people are more vulnerable to propaganda than uneducated people. And you know, if you look at where propaganda-oriented ministry works, it really works amongst educated people. It's because, you know, he says that the issue of, he makes a difference between orthodoxy and orthopraxy. And nothing's wrong with either one. But he said the point of propaganda is orthopraxy. The point is getting people to do what you want without having to think about it. So you don't need to teach Christian doctrine. You don't need to learn it. You don't need to learn the Bible to do these things, because the whole point, the whole reality is to get you to do things without having dialogue. To sort of stimulate the central nervous system in a way that causes you to do things. And, well, that's what our world is about. So, one of the nice things about being in Montana and now in Price Hill is people there are just immune to that stuff. So, anyway. Yeah, yes, ma'am. Yeah. 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 Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. 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 Well, what I look at there is I do spend time in fellowship, discipling, learning from, in teamwork with people who can get things done. I'm pretty good at that. I do that just by being, I just like people a lot. I'm nurtured by people who have this different gift, but I always try to have ministries with people that will not contribute at all to the structure of the church. So I always take on people and visit people who have nothing to give that will directly benefit the church. I think a discipling ministry with leaders is good, but I think it's really good to step away and do that. When I was in most of the churches I've been in, I've asked someone to go with me and do shut-in communion for people. An older person who knows everybody, or calling. So what I'd say is that you organize it, you decide who we're going to see, and then we'll go do it. Because if I try to organize it, it'll just get all jumbled up. When I was at Kenwood Baptist Church, which was a larger church, there was a calling pastor there, and I said to John, every Friday afternoon, I want us to go out calling. And I said, I want you to decide who we're going to call on. I want you to drive. I want you to organize it completely. And he was good at that, so he was more than happy. That way I didn't have to decide how I was going to get there. I didn't have to spend any time wondering who I should call on. And actually, even when we got there, he did a lot of the talking. But it got me into the lives of people who, like that, or people who are suffering and struggling. So I think I've been pretty good at being with leaders and motivating them in my own way, not what anyone else should do. But I've always tried to do that. In my ministry now, I have breakfast with a guy every week. Well, it's kind of a long story, but anyway. I want God to bless me because I take care of people that won't help me at all. I probably shouldn't say this, but I'll say it metaphorically, and if you ever quote me, say it's metaphorical. I tell my wife, I meet with that person because I want good karma. I need some good karma with God. Please quote me metaphorically. But I think, just going to cast my bread on the waters. I'm going to be with people that don't need me or that the church doesn't need. And I believe God's going to bless me if I do that. And I just do it. And it just really, I think it works. Yeah. The other thing is, I'll just say this. If you spend time with people's parents who are old and dying, they'll work hard for you. And they'll be happy to help you if you spend time with them than if you spend with their parents, than if you spend time with them. One of the ways to get in with parents really well, and it's just a natural thing I do, is greet their children. Go around on Sunday morning, if you have a big church, go around, shake hands with children. They're gathered around their parents, ignore the parents, shake those little kids' hands. I'm so glad to see you here on the Lord's Day. How are you doing, Sean? Da-da-da-da-da. And you just kind of get down and you shake their hands. You don't even have to acknowledge the parents' existence, and they will love you. And you do that long enough, and then when they grow up and they just leave Christianity, just their lives are a mess, they will always know that church is a home where someone loved them and shook their hands. And I think so much of pastoring, so much of Christian education isn't just keeping kids out of trouble, but it's giving them the resources to know what to do when everything just blows up. I've had the opportunity to lead people to Christ who grew up in a church, spent their whole life away from the church, and you quote John 3:16 to them, and they're dying, and all of a sudden they just accept Christ. So that's a kind of a roundabout way to answer your question about that. Is that helpful? Any follow-up questions or another question? Pay attention to little people. It's wonderful, it's godly, and you'll get a lot of good out of it. Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, I have just absolute admiration and no access to what it would mean to start a church. So I am in total admiration. I can't answer that because I'm just not built that way. But I do think that an entrepreneurial gift may have that pastoral instinct in there, or maybe not, and then, you know, I think too, if you don't have a pastor, I think we need to be responsible for things that we don't do well. And as much as I talked about limitations, you know, people need to exercise the gifts that they don't do well. And if a pastor says, he or she says, you know, well, I'm not a pastor, well, I don't call on people, well, I'm not outgoing or compassionate, that's no excuse for not doing it. You don't even have to do it that much. But, I don't know, all kinds of jobs are things you have to do that you don't like and you're not good at. So, some pastors are going to do it more than others. I think everyone has to do it. But anyone who starts a church is real high in my book because I can't imagine doing it. So, okay. It's really nice to be here. Any other plenty of questions. Yeah. Yeah. What? Awesome. I love that kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah. That's a very, very good question. I've never been attacked by a pagan. I have never been attacked by a drug dealer, someone that's, I think we need to look at them as our friends. I mean, sometimes hanging out with them is less stressful. And you know, if you're a preacher, then, and they know you are, they ask you what you do, then you don't have to say anything except they know that a preacher is here and is having a good time. But the darkness is very real, and I'm not excluding that. When I was in the Bitterroot Valley, I was the only pastor in 2 towns, and so I did a lot of weddings and a lot of funerals for people that I didn't know or weren't Christians. And sometimes when you do a funeral for someone that's not a Christian, or their lifestyle certainly wouldn't lead you to think they were, whatever that means. When you do that service, you're just looking out there for 1 or 2 pair of eyes that just seem to think to know. Because I always do a Christian service. I mean, I read scripture and I pray and I have a simple message about Jesus, you know. I don't feel any need to do any hypothesis about where they are. I never talk about that. And actually, I don't think they want me to. And so I just talk about that. And then, but there's sometimes I've done services and this is directly, I think it's what you experienced there. And the people who are there are just as dead as the person in the box. And they look at you and their eyes are empty. And I've walked away from those services. I can even feel it now. And I just couldn't work the rest of the day. So I'm being very highly sympathetic to what you're saying. That can really be there. I think being in touch with your own brokenness, you know. I think being in touch with our doctrine of justification helps. You know, so anyway, that's a really good question. I find it easier to be a Christian around non-Christians than I do around Christians. Yeah. Why? Well, I'm not a Presbyterian, even though I grew up Episcopalian and Presbyterian, because I just don't like rules. That's why I'm a Baptist. I've lost a lot of salary being a Baptist. I don't like rules. And that's sort of an answer. But I just love the refreshing nature of being people who are looking at Christianity for the first time or in a new way. You know, our children are, 34, 33, and 30. And whatever postmodernism is, they had these friends and they brought them, and I just loved them. I just find postmodernism so refreshing and powerful. I think we forget the fact that before postmodernism, modernism was what we were against. You remember that? Yeah, so what's so different about this? Relativism goes way, way back. Just look at a Humphrey Bogart movie. You know, it's I find today's ministry to be just thrilling with people who don't want to have anything to do with Jesus or don't know anything about it. I think ministry with the unchurched is thrilling because they don't come with a lot of preconceived notions. It's a lot more like the New Testament now than any other time in America. You know, pluralism, a rampant sexuality, rampant idolatry. Really, the New Testament is our guidebook now. It's finally relevant to culture. Because if you look at the New Testament, and you think of the Old Testament for that matter, well, the Bible is now relevant to what we're doing, and there's so much hope in it. Yeah. I see you nodding. Well, what do you think about that? I think it's true. Yeah. But not liking rules is part of it, isn't it? Okay. Other thoughts or questions? Yeah.
You alluded earlier to having to unlearn the text critical step
Right.
when you're preaching.
Right.
What else, from your experience, do you need to unlearn from Gordon-Conwell?
Nothing. I mean that honestly. I loved every minute I was here. Yeah.
Did you have a favorite professor?
No.
I know 79 was a while back.
Yeah. I liked all my professors. But I will tell you this. I think this is very funny. I went from here into an associate pastorate, and I walked into a situation that was really rough. But when I started the ministry, I didn't need antacids like I did when I was in seminary. I thought, man, this is hard, but look, I'm not taking antacids all the time. So I wasn't a very good student, and I wasn't a very good student, but yeah, that's great. So, people are afraid to go to the ministry frequently. I understand that, but it may not be as bad as seminary. And I say that as someone who loved seminary. And I have no doubt that that's true, but it may not be as bad. You may like it better. Okay? Someone else? No one, say something you just don't like about the book. What don't you like about it? Say something. InterVarsity has me writing a second edition now, which is an incredible honor. So I'm really looking for critique. I want to make it better.
You need more about the bitter root. You need more about the bitter root.
Well, one thing I'm going to do in rewriting, and I'm working on it now, is that I think that part of the power of the book is it's a very one discrete 9-year ministry. So if I make changes, I'm not going to quote anyone, and I'm not going to make a lot. But if I'm not going to quote anyone, give a quote that I didn't know back then. If I use a new narrative, it's going to be one from there. And I'm not going to change anything about it so that it's not a... Actually, you know, the chapter on leadership, I think I've wanted to change that for years. A very close friend of mine at Gordon-Conwell, Alan Poole, some of you know Alan? He's a Presbyterian pastor in North Carolina, and I got the book, gave him the book, and he called me back not that long after it went into print and he read it. He said, well, he said, in your leadership chapter, you're always acting alone. I thought, oh my goodness. I said, well, I do have that characteristic. But I thought, oh my goodness, no, I really do like teamwork. So for years, I've wanted the opportunity. And I'm not going to say, I'm only going to talk about what I did then. So hopefully when I write it, it's actually going to be more authentic to what I thought and really did than now. So that's what I'm doing. So if you have any ideas on how to make it better, tell Scott or someone, and he'll zip it my way, and I'd love that. So thank you very much, and it's been very nice to be here.